All right, I know this one joke. There's a mollusk, see, and he walks up to a sea. Well, he doesn't really walk up, he swims up. Well, actually, the mollusk isn't moving, he's in one place. And then the sea cucumber, well, I mixed it up. There was a mollusk and a sea cucumber. None of them were walking, so just forget that. There was a mollusk and he walks up to a sea cucumber. Normally, they don't talk, sea cucumbers, but in a joke, everyone talks. So just then, the sea cucumber looks over to the mollusk and says, with fronds like these, who needs anemones? All right, that's my intro to Phylum Mollusca, the mollusks. That's what we're talking about today. So, what is a mollusk? Well, a mollusk is a large phylum of invertebrates, animals whose members are known as either mollusks or mollusks, spelled two different ways. Now, mollusk with a K is how we tend to spell it here in North America, but for the rest of the English-speaking world, they spell it typically with a C. Sounds familiar, right? All right, so almost all mollusks have several characteristics that they all have in common, that they share. One is that they have a muscular bag called the mantle. And it's the mantle, this thin bag material that kind of surrounds the internal organs, that also secretes the material and they make the shell. The structure makes the shell. All of them have a muscular foot, and this is used typically for locomotion in some way. A radula, most have a radula. This is a structure that has these chitinous-like hard scraping teeth-like structures used for feeding. And many have one or more shells. Of course, there are some examples of mollusks that do not have a shell. The most obvious one that pops into my mind is a nudibranch or a slug. These are two great examples of shellless mollusks. All right, so we're talking about the mantle here today, and that's what I want to talk about first. And basically, I mentioned before this muscular bag. If we open up this clamshell here, you see this thin membranous structure between the organs and the shell. So this is the right mantle. The other shell that would attach, to this one, there'd be another layer of that mantle. So two layers. Within this muscular bag are the structures like the gills, the foot, the stomach, those types of things. For many mollusks, as I said a minute ago, it's the mantle which secretes and makes the shell. And that's a material that's made of calcium carbonate, the same thing coral rocks are made of. And also pearls. Pearls are made of the same material. All right, I have a little video here on a conch. So watch this.
Yeah, and I'm taking a video. This would be a miniature conch, a baby conch, maybe. Yeah. Woo! He's gonna say, "Let go my shell." Oh, ew! Put me back in the water. Can't breathe. Drop out on you. Look at him! Oh my God!
First of all, notice what she called this organism. She said conch, not conch. That is a very wrong term to use. What's also interesting is you saw the organism itself kind of extending out of the shell there. This organism and all mollusks that have shells are physically attached to the shell. They cannot just detach and leave the shell like say a hermit crab that's taken over a mollusk shell. So they're physically attached. And that main part that we saw sticking out is another structure we're going to be talking about in a few minutes, and that is the foot. All right, so let's talk about the foot. Now, it's used by slugs, those that have no shells, and snails for locomotion. It crawls along the ground with it. That conch, same idea. We see it will come out and help move along the bottom. For things like squids, like if you look at this picture right here, these are Humboldt squids that have washed up on the beaches. The tentacles are basically modified, the modified foot. And they can use it for movement, but also for gathering and capturing food. Here in this clam here, we see the foot right here. And clams use the foot to dig with, to burrow themselves below the surface of the sediment. So we see it there and there. Here's a great example. This is a North Atlantic cockle, and I actually have a shell right here of this organism. So you can kind of see right there, 2 shells there, very similar to what we see in that picture there. And in this image here, we can see that foot sticking out, and watch how they can use it to move around. Now what's happening there is it's using it to flip its body around, and hopefully it's going to get oriented right, that then it can use that foot to start digging into the ground, and the cockle will slowly move deeper and deeper and deeper into the sediment. All right, here's another video that I took. This was your homework, or will be your homework, depending on when you watch this. And this is also that same North Atlantic cockle, and I actually had him on top of my paddleboard, moving around, sticking its foot out. But we're not going to watch that one. All right, and this is another great example of clams, bivalves, using the foot to dig themselves into the sediment, into the sand. These are coquinas that you're going to see in just a minute. They wash up on our beaches out here in Cocoa Beach. We see them all up and down the Florida coast and farther up the mid-Atlantic states. So let's just kind of watch this. Now, maybe you've seen these before. You said, oh, those are periwinkles. That's a bad term. These are coquinas, a type of clam, not just a type of rock. Now, kind of watch some of them. You'll see them stick themselves up, straight up and down, and they'll start burying themselves into the sand. See them over there doing it. You see a lot of them right here. Now, what these clams do is they stay close to the surface. They extend these things called siphons up into the water. Water goes in one siphon, pushes it out the other, and it filters the water, plankton and other organic material, and that's what they feed on. Now, one thought is that if these coquinas are always in the same place and there's lots of food, that's great. They're going to thrive. But sometimes food is patchy, and maybe some of them will be in an area that is detrimental to them, hard for them to feed. So the thought is maybe they've evolved a mechanism so they can move around up and down the beach. So let's see if we see that happening here. Maybe you can see all these little teeny holes. Those little siphons that I talked about that stick up into the water so the water can go in and out. And now we're not seeing as many. And they start appearing. Watch this. This is the best part right here. And they're everywhere. So the thought is that what they'll do periodically is come back up to the surface in a mass number like what we see right here, and then the waves will come in and drag them down the beach further along in one direction or the other, depending on the longshore current, and it moves them around. So the idea is that if they're always moving, they're more likely to find a constant supply of food rather than being in one spot where maybe they got lucky and there's plenty of food, or maybe they weren't lucky and there's not plenty of food. So that is the coquina clam. Here's another video of a clam. This is really neat to watch. You can see the foot right there. It's using the foot to dig a hole, and then it pulls its body down with it. Watch. And then at the other end, this is the siphons. Water goes in one of those openings and back out the other. Now, as it buries itself down, its inside fills up with sand, so it's got to push everything out. So you see it expelling water and sand through the excurrent siphon. So really neat. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the Radula. This is a hard little structure very tough and abrasive, and quite often you can kind of see it down here. This is a limpet right here. So this is something that they scrape the rocks or scrape whatever they're feeding on to get food off of it. Another really neat example is some snails, these cone snails, like this is a cone snail here, this is a cone snail here. They've actually, the radula has been evolved into like a harpoon needle that has a barb on it like a fish hook, and they can inject some of the strongest venom of any organism on this planet. And here's a little video about a particular example. This is a cone snail.
Crawling along the ocean floor is a cone snail. It looks harmless, but appearances can be deceiving. 4 tubes jut out from its shell. The long one at the top is a siphon, which it uses to inhale water and detect prey. The smaller ones on either side are its eye stalks, and in the middle, a deadly proboscis.
That's the radula, and you can see it looks just like a harpoon. We see the point there, we see the barbs, whatever it sticks into, it'll get stuck, and it can release the toxins and then use that to pull its prey back into its mouth.
Concealed within the tip is a lethal weapon. A harpoon loaded with a neurotoxic mix so complex there is no antivenom to thwart it. It's armed with at least 100 different toxins, more than any other creature. When some cone snails go hunting, they like to burrow into the sand and wait. When a meal happens by, the cone snail fires its harpoon. The poisons quickly paralyze the fish. Once its prey is helpless, the cone snail retracts it through its proboscis until it engulfs the fish, swallowing it whole.
Now, if you remember the shell, it had a really thin opening. So it can't pull this fish into the shell, into the stomach. The stomach has to kind of come out of the shell for digestion to take place.
No longer harmless.
All right, the cone snail. And there's many species. Some of them are very, very venomous. Some of them are not so venomous. The Indo-Pacific ones are the ones that are really deadly. We do have them in the Caribbean, but they're not super, super deadly. All right, so let's see. I'll do that. All right, so here's another quick one. Let me exit out of this, go back in. To watch, here's another cone snail capturing prey. Within seconds. Now the fish is paralyzed, and it just pulls it into its mouth. All right, so there's 3 life stages of most mollusks. They have the trochophore stage, which looks like a little spinning top, and this is a planktonic stage, almost microscopic, like this picture right here. Then it'll metamorphose into a larger phase, and it's called the veliger. And this is also planktonic or meroplanktonic, which means this organism spends only part of its life as plankton. And this one quite often says is referred to as resembles a translucent butterfly. And we can see that picture up here. So these are drifting in the ocean currents until they feed enough, capture enough food, grow enough until they settle to the bottom typically and start their adult stage. So we have the trochophore, the belegar, and the adult stage are the 3 stages. All right, so within Phylum Mollusca, there's many different classes. We're going to focus on 3 classes in here: Gastropoda, Bivalvia, and Cephalopoda. So let me show you some examples. This is a great example of a gastropod. Gastropods, basically, members of this class, typically have one shell, like a snail or a conch, or this is a whelk right here. There are members of this group that have no shell, and that would be like the slugs. So gastropod is one shell. Here's an example of one, and here is another example. All right, so that's gastropoda. Then there's bivalvia. Bi means 2. So these are organisms that have 2 valves, and a valve is a shell, like this one right here. This is the Atlantic cockle, and we see it has 2 shells, and it would open like that. And there's a hinge right down there that holds it together. This is what clams are. This is what mussels are. This is what oysters are. Scallops, these are all bivalves. Here's another one right here. This is the tridacna clam. This is the ones that are found in the South Pacific and some of the Indo-Pacific, some of the really, really big ones. The giant tridacna clams can get over 3 feet across the shell, and they open up. And many of these members, or maybe all of these tridacnas, actually have a symbiotic mutualistic relationship with the zooxanthellae, just like corals. So they have a photosynthetic partner living inside of their tissue, photosynthesizing and sharing nutrients. The last one to show you, talk about, are the cephalopods. And we're going to get more into these. But this is a shell from a cephalopod. This is the shell from the nautilus. So coming out of here would be big eyes and tentacles and a siphon jet up there, and it would swim along the water like this, with the tentacles extending outward. Also in this group are the squid, the cuttlefish, and the octopus. So the ones with tentacles fall into the cephalopods. So cephalopods, something like an octopus, is very closely related to a clam. They are both in the same phylum Mollusca. So a little bit on Phylum Mollusca. In the next set of notes, we're going to talk about these individual classes.